Dear Christiano, I spent a lot of my life waiting until I felt ready, waiting until I had enough money, enough confidence, enough certainty, enough experience, enough proof, waiting for the sign that this was the right decision. The funny thing is, when I look back over the last 40 years, none of the biggest moments in my life actually happened because I finally felt ready. They actually happened because I got tired of waiting and I took one step, not the whole staircase, just one step at a time. Every single version of who I am today started exactly the same way. Now, if I look back on the first time I said I'm gay, it took me so long to be able to do that. I mean, I battled internally for years and years and years. I remember even looking at myself in the mirror when there was nobody around me and I couldn't even say the words out of my mouth. I'm gay. So the first step along that journey can be the most difficult one, and it can take years for you to take. It can actually be the thing that holds you back the most. Now, of course, when you take that first step, and I finally was able to look at myself in the mirror and say those words, and then I fell apart. I fell down on the in a heap of mess, crying because I actually admitted it to myself. A lot of that energetic, emotional, traumatic stuff that was sitting inside me started to release. And ultimately, over the coming months and years, I was able to start telling a friend, telling a stranger, going to Sydney to experience, a gay club for the first time. And I actually remember the first time that I actually tried to go to Sydney as well. I remember it clearly. Now, from where I was living, it's about 1 hour drive. And back then, we didn't have the GPS. We had to print out like the directions of where to go on a piece of paper. And I remember driving down there, and I'd never driven to Sydney on my own before, and I got lost. And it took me all the way into a place where I didn't know where I was, and I was driving around for 3 hours. Completely got lost, and ultimately I pulled over the side of the road and I started crying because I've said, "Is this the universe? Is this God telling me that I shouldn't go to this place?" And ultimately, I turned back around and I went home. Didn't go to the club for the first time that night. But that was the first step, getting in the car and actually trying to do that. Ultimately, I built myself up enough courage that a couple of weeks later, I checked it again and I drove back down to the gay club. Again, got lost, but I was determined this time to make it there. Finally made it. I walked in at 9 p.m. There was no one else there. And ultimately, I stayed. I had a good time. And the rest is history. So everything that I've been able to do, the first step has always been the hardest part of it because it's not about the destination. It's actually about the journey, one step at a time. If we look about the first time that, again, another thing that was intimidating to me was going to the gym. The first time I walked into a gym, I remember for months and months and months wanting to start working out on my health. But every time I walked past the gym, there would always be the kinds of people in there. That was my perception. Again, judgments. They all looked like people that were in my school that bullied me. And I remember feeling like if I was to walk into that gym, that I'd be walking back into school and those times when people would scream names at me, would push me down the stairs, do all the things that you do when you get severely bullied. And so for me, took me a long time to take the first step. Then I remember finally building up the courage to go to the gym near me. They had a free trial on and it was a class on and it was a Zumba class. I remember going in and there was like about 20 ladies and two other guys. And I remember feeling a little less intimidated because I did something that I'd been wanting to do for such a long time, but I found an easier way to do it. And that class ultimately didn't lead to me becoming a Zumba master or a Zumba class. I think I did one more Zumba class in my entire life. But just getting in there led me to go, actually, this isn't that bad. And ultimately kept coming back and kept coming back. And I'm ultimately in the best shape that I've ever been in my life as well. I remember the first time that I took a counseling class. took a coach, like started to decide that this is where I was going to go. I remember taking the class. I remember for years and years and years, I told myself that I wanted to be a psychologist, a sports psychologist. It was always in the area of counseling and psychology. I went to uni and I dropped out of uni because it wasn't right for me and all of these things. And I remember taking the class and going into that direction. And it led me to learn all of these skills, finish the degree, and ultimately use it in all of the professions that I've had. When I was in corporate and leading big teams, all of the counseling skills worked marvelously. When I became a coach, all of the skills have transferred as well. And of course, me stepping into counseling, if I hadn't done that, it wouldn't have led to me being a coach. It wouldn't have led me to even having this kind of a podcast, because I don't think I'd be able to trust that my voice was powerful enough for other people to want to listen to it. Now, I'm not trying to say that I'm a powerful human being, but we all are, and we all have something to share. And someone who's listening to this probably is maybe thinking about what's their first step that they're going to take as well. Now, there's so many things that I can think of where I've been in my life where that first step has led to some complete reinvention. I remember booking a plane ticket to Peru to go into the middle of the jungle to do an ayahuasca retreat. Now, I had been struggling with, a lot of stuff for years and years and years. Internal trauma, internalized homophobia, really struggling with living in a world where I felt like I was disadvantaged. And I had a lot of victim mentality. And for a long time, I was looking for something to help. And I would always be interested in trying this or trying that, but ultimately never went and picked a lane. And I remember hearing this one time from a friend who was talking about ayahuasca, because she was Brazilian, and they do a lot of ayahuasca in South America, in different countries, in Brazil, in Mexico, in Peru. And ultimately, it sparked something in me, it lit something up in me. And ultimately, I was looking up, I did all of the research, which again, starting to do research for something, that's the first step, right? If I'm looking towards it and going, hey, is this something I want to do? That is the first step. That's the first spark of something. But the first actual action that I really took was deciding that I'm going to book a plane ticket. And I booked a plane ticket. And then the next day I booked the retreat. And ultimately I ended up going to Peru for 2 weeks, sitting in the middle of the jungle in all these different ceremonies with all these shamans and doing plant medicine. And I can say that that's one of the most pivotal fortnights of my entire life. I remember deeply how healing it was, how I was able to, really release so much built up anger and sadness and fear and hurt and guilt that I was holding on to. And finally just be free to kind of take a different direction. And ultimately it led to me beginning my journey of clearing myself up from years and years of heavy partying and drugs and alcohol, and getting to the point where I was able to say, you know what, that's not the life that I want to live anymore. That's not where I'm going to take as well. Ultimately, it led to me continuing to evolve in my career and going up and handling, growth. When I first started my career in the corporate world, I had a team of, 10, 20 people. And it grew to 50 to 100 to 150 to 250 to 300, like that. And I had to handle it along the way. And there's so much stuff that happens when your team grows at such an exponential rate. And if I hadn't been able to take those steps, it wouldn't have led to me being able to do that. And I probably wouldn't have been able to handle it effectively. And that ultimately wouldn't have led me to really trust and believe that I have the skills to do things on my own, which ultimately meant, I've been wanting to get into coaching ever since I went to Tony Robbins' Unleash the Power Within back when I was 10, 30. And ultimately, I started when I was, I think, 34, just before my 35th birthday. Somewhere around that year, 33, 4 years old. So over 4 years, it took me to finally take the step and say, you know what, I'm going to do this. Because I didn't know the path and I felt stuck and I felt not good enough. I felt unworthy. But ultimately, taking the first step and booking a course and turning up to someone's seminar and learning this and taking that step and then putting myself out there online. I remember the first time I tried to go online and do like a post, like a live video, I was shaking. I think I practiced and practiced and practiced for 2 days before I finally took that first video and did this. Now I can do it at a whim. I can get on a podcast and I can talk for 30, 40, 50 minutes without having a guest to talk to. Now, I'm not saying, wow, look at me, I'm so good. I'm saying that if I didn't take the first step that day and do a live video, I put myself in front of camera and believe that I have something worth saying that someone might want to listen to or that might support them or whatever it is, it wouldn't have led to me getting to a point where I'm now able to, like I said, get on here and share my voice and tell my story. And not because I believe that I'm a guru or that I'm better than anyone, but because I believe it's important to share your perspective and share your journey, because sometimes hearing other people's journey, we can relate to our own. And that's kind of really why I feel like it's important that I came back and have launched Dear Christiano. And to be honest, when I took a break in September of last year, from the podcast, because previously I was doing the Queer Quest podcast. Um, let's even take it back a bit further. I wanted to do a podcast ever since I started my coaching business, which was back in April, May of, 2020, yeah, 6 years ago. And then so I wanted to podcast and I kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And finally I moved to Bali. And I remember even for months after that, I still hadn't done it. And I finally said one day, you know what, we're just going to get on and we are going to talk about why we want to have a podcast. And ultimately, in doing that, that was my very first episode. And I think I was talking about my own story, my own journey, and struggling and being bullied and all of that. And I remember just putting it out there. And the next time someone saw that I launched it, they said, I'd love to be on your podcast. And then it just grew and grew and grew. But if I hadn't have just taken that first step, back then it was called the Total Boss Podcast. Ultimately, I had a transformation, it changed into the Queer Quest podcast. And now ultimately, when I took the break in September, I thought I was just going to take a break for a month or two, but it led to being 9 months because in that time frame, a lot of things shifted for me. A lot of things happened. Great things happened. But ultimately, I didn't really want to go backwards. I felt like going back to just revisiting that podcast in the way that it was. It felt like I'd grown a lot. I'd really had grown a lot internally, along with business ways and all of the things. And so ultimately, going backwards just felt like I was going backwards. And so I kind of get stuck in, how do I take the next step? What should I do? What's it going to be about? And ultimately, especially the last few months, I've been thinking about this quite a lot. Probably most days I've been sitting somewhere pondering about what I want to talk about on the podcast. Ultimately, a week ago, I read a post that I shared on uh, on Facebook and on Instagram around me turning 40, because I turned 40 just about a month and a half ago. And in doing so, I was able to actually realize that, like, wow, there's a lot of that's happened, because I look back on my 30s and I was kind of almost talking to my 30-year-old self. And so in the writing that post, I said, this is a podcast episode. So I started there. And then ultimately it led to me then posting another post around friendships, because I was pondering on my friendships and moving forward and so I did another thing about that. And then today it's like I've been listening to this song on repeat, and it's all about taking that first step. And it just made me think and reflect so much about how many times I've taken the first step and how much it's led to a complete reinvention in my life. Like, if I look at my life, I can look at it in a group of different stages. And ultimately, it's like every single time I've had that first step, it's led to a completely different life. When I came out, my life completely shifted. When I moved to Sydney, my life completely shifted. When I got promoted to the career that I was in the corporate world, where I was leading 300 people in the end, my life completely shifted. When I became a coach, my life completely shifted. When I moved to Bali, my life completely shifted. When I've been doing this podcast, when I met Davi, my life completely shifted, right? Every single time it led from one thing after another, me just taking the first step. And oftentimes people think, like, let's just say like me moving to Bali, getting on the plane wasn't that first step, right? Actually, the first step happened when I decided that I was ready to leave the corporate world. I said, you know what? I'm going to focus on my coaching business. I can't keep going here. This is not where I want to go. Even though I had a six-figure career, I had great connections. I was moving up the corporate ladder. Probably by now we're giving, running 500, 600 people. Who knows what could have been happening in the last couple of years, 5 years. 5 years, yeah, it's been 5 years now. But so me deciding to leave the corporate career was the first step, because then when I left the corporate world and was focusing on my coaching business, I said, you know what? I don't have to be living in Sydney anymore. I'm not tied down to any location. Where would I want to live? Now, this is during COVID. And I remember going, I could go to Thailand, I could go to the Philippines, because I spent so many years going to the Philippines and I have a big network of people. I could go there. Um, I could go to Bali. I've been to Bali many times. Ultimately, I led myself to decide on Bali. And so the next step was deciding I was going to go to Bali. Then the next step was I had to get approval from the government to leave the country. The next step was booking the flight. The next step was packing up my house and taking my dog to Queensland to my parents' house. And then ultimately getting on that plane. You see, sometimes people think that getting on the plane is the first step, but there's all these micro decisions and choices that happen along the way. Same thing when it comes to, my relationship with David. Like, I came to Bali. I wasn't looking for a relationship. I was looking just to meet people and have a good time. Really, that's truthfully honest. Have some fun, hook up, enjoy life. Because like I was trying to, be free from a different world and kind of see who I am in this world. And so ultimately, the first step was deciding I'm going to go online and go on the apps and start chatting to people. And then ultimately, going and meeting up with David was another step. And ultimately, you know, me choosing to go on another date. And then ultimately, it rolled and rolled and rolled. So I didn't just get in a relationship because I said, look, hey, I want a relationship. It was just a step after step. And ultimately, I kept taking a step that felt good to me. And ultimately, the staircase is still going and our relationship is still growing. And so if you can understand where I'm trying to go with this, is that, every single part of this it starts with a decision. And when I talk about the first step, it's really just about saying, hey, look, you know what? That book that I've been wanting to write, that, that adventure that I've wanted to go on, that holiday, looking for love, maybe learning a new skill, all those things are big things. But if you break it down, the first step isn't writing that first page of the book. The first step is actually carving out, the idea of like, what do I want to talk about? And actually then going, hey, look, this my book is about this, okay? And then maybe the ultimately is figuring out, how many chapters you want to have. Like, you see what I'm saying? Like, everything isn't about the first word, isn't always the first step. It's just about there's a lot of there's decisions that you are say, I'm going to become an author. I am an author in the future, whatever it is, right? All of these things will be the first step, but then leads to the next step. And sometimes people think so far about like, oh, this is the ultimate destination I want to get to. And it feels overwhelming, and ultimately they never take those steps. I know whenever I've struggled and it's taken me a long time to do it, it's because I'm thinking of like, okay, like, how is this going to be received and all of these things. When ultimately the podcast, yes, of course, it's for an audience, but ultimately I have to enjoy doing it, and I have to know what I want to like what like the level of it. So the difference between Queer Quest, Queer Quest felt like, the podcast was me about teaching and coaching and personal development and motivation and all that stuff, which is great for people in the queer community, LGBTQIA plus, right? This podcast to me, and why I've changed it to be called Dear Christiano, it's because it's almost like those conversations that you have in your head. I wanted to have those out loud about all different kinds of topics and share my experiences and my stories around it instead of trying to teach. Now, I know that naturally in my heart, I'm a teacher and a coach, and that's how often I speak to a lot of people. So in doing so, I'm also trying to actively shift the narrative in how I do it, because it's different and I want it to be more vulnerable and more like unfiltered and, more me. I don't necessarily want to be like, okay, here's the framework, here's the discussion, here's the statistics, because at the end of the day, that's all great, fantastic. There's millions of those kinds of podcasts out there. I just want to be able to talk to myself and almost have a cool experience because, I'm saying this, and of course, I've had a bit of a preparation as to what I want to say. But as I go through it and I share the stories and it weaves in and out, it also is like helping me in a lot of ways as well. So there have been many times along the journey that, you know, the first step for me has been the most difficult because I'm thinking of the ultimate outcome. And it's great to have a goal and a vision and see that. But also, in order to actually take the step, what is the first step that you need to take? And that's where I'm coming back to because I don't want to keep putting things off because it feels too big. I just want to see progress, progress over perfection, progress over result. And I also have really been coming to deeper terms and deeper insights and deeper feelings around not worrying about the destination, but actually enjoying the journey because each day, each moment is actually just a part of the journey. You never actually arrive somewhere. You never actually are at the end or, whatnot. Yes, you can achieve something, but then what? There's always something more. So it's always actually just another step that you are trying to achieve because, for example, when someone says, what, I want to earn $1 million. You earn $1 million, then what? You want to earn 2 million, 5 million, 10 million. Everything has another step forward. And so if you are ultimately thinking of it in a destination step, you're also great to see the vision, but for you to actually do the work, you need to know what the steps are. And again, you don't always need to see step 5 to be able to understand that, step 1. Because what happens as you go along the journey, step 1, step 2 will come to itself. And that's why I said to myself, you know what, if I work on each episode at a time, I'm not going to plan anything, but I've got 1 week from everything. So now I'm posting 3 episodes of this launch of Dear Christiano. And then I have a week and I'll be launching a new episode every single week. So I have a week to decide and to figure out. Before I used to be structured, like, okay, here's the next 5 weeks worth of podcasts. And I would have all the ideas. And again, it'd be frameworks and teachings and conversations like that, which is great. And sometimes I'd have guests on. But in order for me to evolve, I'm just focusing on the next step and the next episode and just seeing how that goes for me. So I am no longer going to be someone who waits for permission to take that step because really it has been something that has held me back in the past. What's this person going to think? Or if I do it in this way and da 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 da, I have to follow what's right for me. And again, in order to do that, I need to break things down and take that next step because I've changed my life more times than I can even count. I've moved countries, I've changed careers, I've fallen in love, I've started multiple businesses. I even sat in the Amazon drinking ayahuasca and no one in anyone, my family, friends knew exactly what I was doing at all. I just left and did it. I built communities. I've left entire versions of myself behind. And you know what? I really still catch myself at times waiting for permission. I still wonder if this is the right move. I still wonder if I'm ready. Maybe sometimes for some people, in certain circumstances, confidence never arrives first. Maybe the actual movement that you're taking, that step forward and just having that momentum, that creates the confidence. Maybe the first step isn't actually the reward, it's just the invitation. And for me, recording this podcast and getting here, I've been thinking about it for months. I mean, I remember sitting there, I have redesigned what I wanted to talk about. I thought about it. I thought about the name of it. I thought about and looked up the artwork for it. I changed the name a few times. I questioned myself. I waited. And then one day, I finally just pressed record, and here we are. And if there's anything that I have learned over the past 40 years, it's this. Life has never shown me the whole path. Not once. It has just simply asked me, are you willing to take one more step? Because every beautiful thing in life, it actually began exactly the same way. So wherever you are today, maybe you don't need another sign. Maybe you don't need another plan. Maybe you actually don't even need to have more confidence to start. Maybe you just need to trust yourself enough to take that next step. Maybe it's the first step, maybe it's the second, but maybe you just need to trust yourself enough to take that next step. Because I'm going to be taking mine too. And if you want to join along the journey, I'll meet you there.